Okay, so today I want to continue talking about this process of redoing what we've done. So we were talking a whole long time about G-sets on the group axis. And then I started saying, well, you can actually think of those as giving you groupoids. And I said, and by the way, our spans of G-sets we can reinterpret as spans of groupoids. And this leads us into the world where everything is going to be about groupoids. And the decategorification process that we'll use to get more normal mathematics from what we're doing is this process Jim is talking about, namely degroupoidification. And I'll also talk about that. So here's where we were last time. So I talked about a map that sended G sets for any group G to groupoids. And so let me just remind you how that went. So a G set is a set, say S, together with an action of G. So the most exciting thing about it is this action. And what we're going to do is we're going to send it over to a groupoid. The G set that goes to this groupoid here.
Why is the bar down?
Because I'm actually talking about specific G sets.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So specific, yeah. So maybe I should have dropped the bar down here. So that particular G set, any old G set, will go to what I call the weak quotient of the set by the group action. So the way that works, to remind you, is nicely drawn in pictures. So it says the main thing you have with a G set is this. If you have a pair consisting of a group element and an element of your set, this action will send that pair to a new element of your set, which you call G applied to S, or G times S. Over here, we think of that arrow in a different way. We think of it as a morphism in the following way. We say that whenever we have a group element acting on some element of our set and giving some other element of our set, we think of that as a process. We think of that as a morphism in this groupoid. And since that morphism depends both on G and on S, the correct name for that morphism is something like G comma S. So this is a picture of a typical morphism in this groupoid, the weak quotient. And I worked out last time, you worked out last time, how to compose these. So if you have group element going from here, and then another group element taking GS to H of GS, you can compose them and get this morphism, which I just call HG comma S. Sure.
Where we're thinking of this is groupoid where, I don't know if the word to think it, where S represents the sort of component of the groupoid.
No, S is the set of objects.
No, the little s though.
Oh, S is a particular object.
Right. So this groupoid has each element of S as an object of the groupoid.
That's right. Yeah. So this is a picture of an arbitrary morphism in this groupoid. So this is an arbitrary object in this groupoid. This is some other object in the groupoid. A morphism must be of this form.
Invertible.
It will turn out to be invertible because then we could apply G inverse comma GS. We did that in class last time. And that will turn out to be the inverse. So it's a visual pun that this is a math here and then this is a morphism. Don't let that fool you. It's just meant to be a joke. But I mean,
I guess I'm thinking like, so if we have transitive group action, then this whole thing is actually just a single component.
That's right. So the orbits of our original G set turn into the components, the isomorphism classes, another name for the same thing, in this groupoid. That's right. So then next I was saying that we have a way to take maps between G sets into maps between groupoids. But the interesting thing, so now I'm going to move over here, Jim, is that it works even when we have two different G sets with different groups G. So you have a map from one G set, here's our G set, to some other one, let's call it a G prime set. So it's a set S prime with an action of the group G prime. I'll tell you exactly what I mean by a map of this sort, but let me finish my first sentence first. It's going to go into a functor between groupoids. So it'll turn into a functor from my groupoid S weakly mod G to my groupoid S prime weakly mod G prime. So what's a map of this sort? So I said what it was once upon a time, I think. It's a commuting square, yeah, I guess so. So I'm just thinking of it slightly differently right now. I'm thinking of it as first of all, a map from S to S prime, so a function from S to S prime, and then a function from a homomorphism, from the first group G to the second group G prime, and then such that everything is compatible with the action. That's probably commuting square.
Or the anti prime. Oh, you know.
So such that if I apply my group of element G to my element S, of my set S, and then map over, it's the same thing as if I map over and then act, but I now act not by an element of G, but by an element of G prime, so I have to use my map B. Sorry. To go over there. And so we ran into this situation when we were talking about these certain things that were like heck operators, where two different groups were involved, right? So we were thinking about the process relating, say, a k-dimensional subspace of an n-dimensional space, and a k-dimensional subspace of an n plus one-dimensional space. There's some easy way to take the first kind of thing into the second kind of thing, just by adding on an extra dimension. But in the first thing, the group GLN acts. In the second thing, the group GLN plus one acts. And so the fact that we can do this in an invariant way, an equivariant way, requires little thought, and there it's a fairly simple piece of little thought. It's just that GLN is contained in GLN plus one. So in that particular case, this homomorphism is just an inclusion. But this idea works in general. So you have some symmetries of something, some other symmetries of something else. What does it mean for a map to be compatible with the symmetries? Well, you need a map from the first group of symmetries to the second group of symmetries to make it all make sense. And so this is the right notion of a map from a G set to a G prime set. And the point is that's sort of complicated sounding, and the point is that it becomes easier when we think in terms of groupoids. It's just a functor between groupoids, which is the thing that always goes between groupoids. And how does it work? Well, it's pretty easy to see how it should work. Namely, if I have any old morphism in the first groupoid, that's weakly mod G, it's a thing like this, right? And I want to turn it into a thing in S prime weakly mod G prime. So what do? I just hit everything in sight with the appropriate phi. So this gets sent to a morphism over in here, which is just sort of the only thing it could possibly be. B of S going via B of G, B of S, to B of G S. It just hit everything with the right font of the Greek letter phi. And the reason why I'm using tons of different fonts for the same Greek letters doesn't really matter. Blind, they all look like a phi, and you're not missing much. So that's how it works, and it's up to you to check that this is a functor. And the only hard thing about it is remembering what a functor is, I guess. So you have to check it composing over here, get sent to composing over here. Somewhere along the line, you probably better use this equation. If you don't, something wrong. So that's the idea. And so the idea really is that groupoids are a more compact, clear way to think about a bunch of things with a bunch of symmetries between those things. The things are the objects, the symmetries are the morphisms. If I've got such a bunch of things with symmetries, you've got such a bunch of things with symmetries, there's a sensible notion of a map from mine to yours. functor between groupoids. And so that's just clearer, ultimately, than messing around with this kind of thing. There are lots of other reasons why I want to mess around with groupoids, but this is just one. Okay. Yeah?
What was your reason for using our weekly homology?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I meant to point that out. So let's get a new frame here. So when you have a group acting on a set, there's a concept that people talk about a lot about the set mod the group. So this is just a set of equivalence classes where we say where we decree that the equivalence relation is that G of S has been made equal to S. We made it equivalent, or right, so the other, yeah. So the point is, when you mod out by group, whenever there's a symmetry carrying one element of your set to another, you say, for me, they're equal. I decree them equal. We weakly mod out when we replace that nasty word equal by the better word, which is isomorphic. So here, we don't have the GS is equal to S, but instead, it has that this object GS is isomorphic to the object S.
It's almost like we don't forget how many things are in each equivalent class.
We don't forget that, although actually there could be some equivalence groupoid where we had a different number of objects.
Okay.
So what we really don't forget is not so much the number of things, the number of elements of our set S. The main thing we don't forget is we don't forget the symmetries. We don't forget the fact that there are symmetries. So if we had an element of S that was mapped to itself by 50 different elements of G, then we get 50 different morphisms from that object to itself, and we see, hey, this object has 50 symmetries. Whereas when you do the ordinary modding out, you don't remember that. You wouldn't say anything about it. So the idea is, a very important idea in categorification is that where somebody uses equations between things, you, being smarter, use specified isomorphisms between them. We're not just saying that they're isomorphic, we're specifying a particular isomorphism. So it's, in other words, it's like Dope says that two things are equal if there's some way to get from one to the other, whereas you, being more careful, say, no, I want to remember how I got from one to the other, so I'll stick in this isomorphism in there, and that's the whole point of categorification as far as I'm concerned. It's to not mistake a process for a mere equation, to actually keep track of the process. So the weak quotient keeps track of the process. The set of isomorphism classes of this thing is this thing, right? The two guys that are isomorphic here are equal here. So it's a downhill process, taking this thing and replacing this stupider thing. Right. So what we get here is a new focus where we focus on groupoids and functors between them, and also spans of groupoids, where we thought before of G sets and functions between them that preserve the G action, spans of those. And so we actually have this this category-enriched category. Jim was talking about it. Most people don't use that term most of the time. If you want to talk like most people, in fact, you would probably say bicategory. Or there's a certain crowd of people who realize that eventually we're going to run out of Greek names for numbers. So we start talking about a 57 category. I have to consult some classicists and friends of yours to figure out what the Greek word for 57 is. And get a very long, complicated word. So instead of bicategory, another name for it is a weak two-category. Or if you really want to show up, just call it a two-category and hope people know what you're talking about. They're different variants. But anyway, this thing that we get, what is this thing? It's a thing, so there's a, we get. You have a category and a category with groupoids as the object. And then what goes between groupoids? Well, you could say functors, but in fact we'll do spans of groupoids. So a groupoid of X spans of groupoids. I mean, you have something going from X to Y would be a third groupoid S equipped with functors down to X and Y. So spans of groupoids. So these are the objects. These are the morphisms of the objects. So we talked a lot about spans and G-sets, relations, and other things similar to this, but sort of close to the definitive kind of morphism we're interested in this geometric representation theory. And then isomorphisms of spans. I can talk about general maps of spans, but I think I want to just think about isomorphisms of spans right now. So I've mentioned that idea before. Actually, I should probably here precise, I should say equivalences of spans. We sort of categorify things to do. So the idea is, if I've got a span from X to Y, and you've got a span from X to Y, there's a notion of when they're isomorphic, there's also a notion of when they're equivalent. All these guys are groupoids now, so there's a concept of an equivalence of groupoids, which you can stick in there. And then we want this diagram to commute up to natural isomorphism. That's getting a little technical, and so if it sounds scary, it's best to just forget about this for now.
So what is the span of groupoids again?
A span of anything is a diagram that looks like that,
In that category.
in whatever category you happen to be in. So a span of groupoids, a groupoid, what goes between groupoids? Functors, so these have got to be functors. So a span of top algebras, homomorphism, and algebra. So this concept of span is very general. Maybe you got fooled because when we started out, we talked about spans, meaning spans of sets. Right? But that's sort of like the vanilla flavor of spans, where you don't even bother saying what category you're in. Category set is the default category. So this is a bicategory. So we have things going between those, and things going between those. So these are called the two morphisms going between the morphisms. But if you don't know much about bicategories, you shouldn't panic just yet, because the main thing we're going to do with this thing is decategorify. We're going to chop it down to something a little bit simpler, which will be a mere category. So this third level here is going to get sort of truncated. Decategorification, you can sort of think of it as chopping off somebody's head, and pointed out. The top level morphisms go bye-bye. So, you have a mathematician at the camera. So what the cameraman pointed out last time was that we have this kind of decategorification process of a special sort called degroupoidification. Going from this two category that I just mentioned to something simpler that's all about linear algebra. And so this fancy one, maybe I'll just summarize it. I use a slightly different notation than Jim for describing two categories. So he likes like the objects on top, and then the morphisms, and then the two morphisms. so on. But I just do it slightly differently. So I say groupoids, spans of groupoids, and isomorphisms of spans of groupoids. So it goes from those things to well, I'm going to put in a little caveat in a second, which is why I'm hesitating. But it goes roughly to vector spaces and then linear operators. And we often work with complex vector spaces, but it would really work for any field. Let's see, I have to mention a couple of things here. So the main thing you notice is that there's something funny going on here. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Well, that's the decategorification. These things sort of get forgotten. If you wanted to make it more balanced, you could, in fact, put an entry over here that would make it easier to understand the formal status of this decategorification process. You usually like to have a process going from some type of entity to some entity of the same type. This is a bicategory. This is a mere category. It's a little scary. What should this be to make it to reconcile it? Well, what's an isomorphism of linear operators? You guys are thinking way too hard.
Equality.
Equations. Yeah, there's nothing going between linear operators. They're either equal or not. Well, I guess that's two things going between linear operators. Equality or inequality, right? So Jim was, in fact, talking about this in his last talk. He was talking about truth value enriched categories, right, where things are either related or not. This is an example of that, although this is a symmetrical kind of situation where things are related in a symmetrical way. So they're called an equivalence relation. In this case, it's equality. So the point is that if there's an isomorphism between spans, you get an equation between the linear operators that they give.
So they're not really forgotten. They're gone, but not forgotten.
Gone, but not forgotten. A gone functor? But not a forgetful functor? Yeah, go-full functor? So, right, well, so you could have lots of interesting different isomorphisms between two different spans, and they all nearly the same equation between linear operators. So that's the same kind of decategorification issue that I mentioned just a minute ago. Right? When you replace isomorphisms by equations, the main thing you lose is the knowledge that there could have been lots of different isomorphisms between things. Qualities are sort of like one or none. So I want to describe this decategorification, this particular decategorification process called Degroupoidification. And I'm sort of horning in a bit on Jim's turf, because he was actually explaining it. But hopefully you'll enjoy hearing both of us talk about it better than just one. Our own different ways, slightly different ways of talking. One technical caveat is that this business will only really work if some sums converge. And one way to guarantee that, which is overkill, is to insist that your groupoids be finite. They have finitely many objects and finitely many morphisms. So, for example, certainly if you have a finite group acting on a finite set, the weak quotient is going to be a finite groupoid. So that would certainly be okay. Now, we're actually also interested in infinite groupoids, like the groupoid of all finite sets, or the groupoid of all finite-dimensional vector spaces. So in that case, this still works some of the time, but some sums may converge or diverge, so you have to be more fine print about it.
What types of sums?
We shall see very soon. So I'm going to sketch how this process works. And then we will see a sum. I'll give you a hint. When you apply an operator to a vector and you work it out in terms of a basis, you're doing matrix multiplication. You're doing ding, 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 ding. You're doing a sum there. So that's what we're going to get when we. That's going to show up here, and those sums could diverge if our vector spaces were infinite dimensional. So I'm just trying to make everything very tame. Not worry about that just yet. So let's see. There are lots of things I should talk about, actually. I'm not going to be able to talk about them all at once. So, for example, I said we have this bicategory of groupoids, spans, things going between spans. One thing I didn't tell you is how you compose spans of groupoids. I better tell you about that. I told you once upon a time how to compose spans of sets, or spans of G sets. I said you form a pullback. So you have this span and this other span, and put a new thing up here. So for spans of groupoids, you compose them using something called a weak pullback, where something that had been equated before gets to be an isomorphism now. So I need to talk about that a bunch, and we need to calculate some weak pullback. But I think before I even tell you that, which is a little more technical, I want to tell you how we're going to turn a finite groupoid into a vector space, and how we're going to turn a span of finite groupoids into an operator. Then, knowing how to compose operators will give us a clue, maybe, as to how we're supposed to compose the spans. So Jim gave a really wonderful conceptual explanation of what's going on here. Let me write it down in a more pedestrian way. So suppose X is a groupoid. Then there's something you can form called the zeroth homology of that groupoid. And I was just afraid that maybe Jim was making it seem as if it was something tricky, although he said what it was. Okay. Sometimes Jim will just say it once, and not write anything down, and if I heard that once, you may wonder, what is this weird thing, zeroth homology of a groupoid? But it's like a completely pathetic concept. So I like to write things down like that are completely pathetic, so that you see how pathetic it is. So I guess I need to introduce something first. So what's the zeroth homology? I just want to introduce a little piece of notation. So given a category, one of the things we're always doing is looking at the set of isomorphism classes of objects. And I do that often enough that I want a notation for it. I just want a very inconspicuous little notation, so I just write a bar underneath it. So let this thing be the set of isomorphism classes of objects. Sometimes it's too big to be a set for somebody, but it will always be a set for somebody else. So some people talk about sets and classes. But if you've taken enough classes on classes, you learn that they're like things that are even bigger than classes. And so there's a whole business called the axiom of universes, which says that you can treat those classes as sets in some other model of mathematics. And then if you get even bigger ones, then you need another universe. This stuff is completely irrelevant to what we're talking about here, right? So the biggest category we're ever going to talk about is something like the category of finite sets that has countably many isomorphism classes, right? All natural numbers. So we're never going to get anything bigger than that.
But they do exist.
Yeah, you can deal with this stuff, but let's, it's like you only want to worry about it when you have to. So that's right. So in other words, if you really want to know, right, so you have to define the concept of category relative to a particular universe, and then the type of set this is could occupy the next universe, and something like that. But it's really not working.
But isoclasses of objects would be in the same universe.
If your category had a set of objects, then this would be a set. Whatever your definition of set is. Talking about this thing makes people think the category theory is like really mysterious and complicated, but it's In practice, you don't hardly never use the word equivalence. Hardly ever or never.
If you find yourself worrying about it, it's a sign you're doing something wrong.
That's right. I mean, it's like, if you're like trying to play a game with someone to like take turns guessing even bigger numbers than each other, then yeah, you can start getting numbers out. So big you can't even tell if they're numbers anymore. But it's only that type of stuff that leads people to worry about these issues. What's the biggest infinity that you know? Okay. So this is a form of decategorification too, right? So this is taking a category into a set, and that's a very basic step down the notch of any categories. One category to a zero category to a set. That's not degroupoidification, but it does show up in degroupoidification, which I will now explain. Okay. So here's the zeroth homology of a groupoid. So the zeroth homology of our groupoid X is I want to be really careful this one. Sorry, what did you say? Free on X bar, that's right. It's the free vector space. You all know this one. I didn't say.
We gave it a name.
The free vector space on X bar. To be really precise, you might write something like this. K of X bar meaning like formal K linear combinations. K is my field, which could be the complex numbers. Formal K linear combinations of elements of X bar. When that set X bar is finite, this vector space is isomorphic to its dual, right? And then you can...
The formal K linear, is it also still formal finite K linear?
Yeah.
So it is,
Yeah,
it is free of X bar.
Yeah, this is the free vector space on X bar, regardless of whether X bar is finite or infinite. That's right. The dual vector space is isomorphic to this when X bar is finite, which is some touchy things when it's infinite. And perhaps even now I'm being too fussy and pedantic, just in the way that Jim was saying one shouldn't be. But infinite sets come up often enough that it's worth worrying about a little bit. So this is H0 of X. The point is, there's also this other thing called the cohomology of X. And the zeroth cohomology is the dual of the zeroth homology when we're working with coefficients in a field. If you want to indicate what field you're using, you can write it like this. Zeroth cohomology of the coefficients in the field K. Often you know because you're working with the complex numbers or something, you don't bother mentioning that. But anyway, the zeroth cohomology of X is H super 0 X K, and it's just the dual of the zeroth homology. That's because we're using coefficients in the field. You could take this as a definition if you don't know much about cohomology. And the point is that is K to the X bar, which is, in other words, which is just functions from X bar to K. No. That's the whole point.
Oh, that is that.
You can think of finite linear combinations of elements of the set as functions with finite support, but that's not the same as all the functions.
Yeah.
And the dual of the former space is the latter space, because the dual is bigger. It could be isomorphic, if it's finite, that's the same thing, but it could be bigger. So they're slightly different. But they're not, but they're isomorphic when X bar is finite, and then you don't have to worry about it. So this is just some linear algebra that everybody should know that for some reason people cannot. So I'm going to talk mainly about the homology, but the cohomology could show up too someday. usually will show up. So how does this degroupoidification work? Yeah.
All functions here, no,
All functions. That's right.
just like those basically.
It's the dual space of this vector space H sub 0.
As long as it's set.
X bar is just a set. So I don't like to talk about the dual space of the set. Makes me nervous. Because duality usually means you take some object of some type and you get another object of the same general type. So the two objects that are of the same type are the homology and the cohomology. They're both vector spaces. And the cohomology is the rule of the homology. And the homology is the finite linear combinations of guys and X bar. The cohomology is sort of the infinite linear combinations of them, or more precisely the functions from X bar to be non-zero infinitely many places. Let me do an example. Okay, I realize it's much better to do an example. Let's take X to be my favorite groupoid of finite sets. Okay, so that's the groupoid that we're talking about a whole lot these days. So what's the zero? Zero is, you tack a little zero on a category and you get its underlying groupoid. Again, maybe I'm introducing too much notation, but that's something we often do. We just pick a category and only consider the isomorphisms and get a groupoid. And so both the category of finite sets and the groupoid of finite sets are important. Put a zero there. So let's figure out the homology and the cohomology. So the homology is just the formal k-linear combinations of elements of X bar. Well, what's X bar usually called by normal mortals? And the natural numbers, including 0. Unless you're one of these people that thinks that the empty set doesn't exist because it has no elements. So these are. So what is this? This is finite formal linear combinations of natural numbers. My God, did you know that you learned about those in high school?
Yes.
What did they call them back then?
Polynomial.
Polynomials. Yeah, that's right. Right. So to make you less nervous, instead of writing a finite linear combination of natural numbers to be something like that, which would make you very nervous, yeah, because. But instead of writing something like that, anyway, they would just stick this stupid little X here as a way to keep you from getting nervous, right? And so you think of a finite linear combination of natural numbers as a polynomial. Right? So this is usually known as the polynomials in your favorite variable. T? Okay, I was afraid I was going to use X.
Right.
I often will use something like X. Maybe I'll use T. Let's not use X, so freaked out. So that's the sort of interesting thing. So the homology of finite sets is polynomials. That could just be some idle curiosity if it weren't for the fact that things you can do with finite sets get to be related to things you can do with polynomials. We'll talk about that a whole lot more, but I'll say that there's this whole theory of species and their generating functions, which is based on this. But let's go ahead and take the cohomology. So cohomology of the same groupoid is the dual of the homology. So it's A to the set of X. So it's functions from the natural numbers. I'm being evil. Making fun of people who write equations when they should write isomorphisms. And what are you? So,
That's an N as well, right? And
yeah, right. So what do you call functions from natural numbers? If you call these polynomials, what do you call? No, you're not allowed to do this, but you're getting too good at it. So what do you call functions from the natural numbers to your favorite
I would
field?
say that's not in high school.
This was not in high school. That's right. So now we go up to college. So what do you call those?
Or
Power series, formal power series, if you want to emphasize it, you don't give a darn if they converge. It's purely formal. So for some reason, if you're really casual about something, you can say it's formal. Paradox. So, yeah, so casual power series in one variable is the dual of the polynomials in one variable.
And actually, engineers are also making fun of formalists, people who worry about convergence of power series. They make fun of those people as being like formalists who are just concerned about formal mathematics.
That's right. Formal is a very double-edged meaning. The opposite thing. But it's generally not good.
I mean, even this is an academic question.
Academics don't like to be too formal, apparently, so they make fun of some things.
Well, but even in this question is an academic interest. The word
You mean
academic.
purely academic interest, or since we're academics, we're actually interested?
Then people say it's academic.
Oh, I see. You're saying that it's like
Well, it's
academic.
completely,
Right, academic.
The same word.
Right. Professors, they just think about things as academic. So, pedantic is also a pedant with somebody who teaches. So I'm making pedantic distinctions all over the place here. So those two examples will be extremely important, and it's actually really the latter that's most related to what we call generated functions, because generated functions are often formal power series, not just polynomial. Let me just ask you a question. What about a different groupoid, the groupoid of finite-dimensional vector spaces over some field? Often it will be our finite field, our field with few elements. It has nothing to do with our field K that we're using for coefficients around here. So someone tell me, and I guess I rule out a proof. I'm just getting way too good at these things. So tell me about, say, the homology of this groupoid. Oh, I meant the groupoid. What about this? It's the same. Why?
because the underlying sets are both n. Or sorry.
Yeah,
set of
instead of
isomorphism
isomorphism classes of objects, it's still just the natural numbers. Instead of talking about cardinality of a finite set, we talk about dimension of a finite dimensional vector space. It's still just any old natural number. So it's the same. And of course, that's the theme running throughout this course. The groupoid of finite sets and the groupoid of finite dimensional vector spaces, particularly over a finite field, act the same a whole lot. And so now we're seeing that their homologies and their cohomology is the same. And that will allow us to play some huge affirmation tricks where we take some formula that we derive in the case of finite sets and then see how it mutates, how a whole bunch of Q's show up and we replace that with this category here.
Is there some sort of adjointness between free and dim or something like that? What these two clearly are doing something?
Now, dim doesn't really give you a set, it just gives you a natural number. So it's a little more fancy than an adjointness. Yeah, there's a decategorification thing going on between finite sets and natural numbers. So it's three entries in your commutative diagram you're imagining there involving free vector space going from finite sets to finite dimensional vector spaces, dimension going to natural numbers, cardinality going down from the finite sets to natural numbers. That's mu. Okay, let's see. Now, so groupoids are going to turn for us into their zeroth homology, just linear combinations, finite linear combinations of isomorphism classes of objects. So next is what about the maps? So how does a span of finite groupoids turn into an operator? It should turn into a Hecke operator, of course. So we have some span of finite groupoids.
You haven't mentioned the group yet.
Well, we've got rid of the group. Right? That was the point at the beginning of the class. So once upon a time, we had a group acting on a set. So we were thinking about category G sets. But now we've figured out how we can take any old G set for any G and turn it into a groupoid.
Where the group is just inherent symmetry or automatic.
Yeah, that's right. So if you had a group acting on a set, you can convert it into this groupoid, and that keeps track of everything we need to know. And that allows us to work with situations where the group is variable from position to position in this diagram. And that's right. So we've done a kind of conceptual shift here away from G sets towards groupoids. And so when I say Hecke operator, you're still back there thinking about it involving G sets, but we're going to come around back and we're going to do it for these groupoids, and we're going to do it right now, in fact. So we're going to say how to take such a span and get a linear operator between vector spaces, and I guess I will call that operator H0. What should I call it? I need a name for the span as a whole, and I'll get some operator from it going from H0 of X. Maybe I'll put off giving it a name. That's the solution. I'll just give it a linear operator from H0 of X to H0 of Y. Span, this involves a bunch of information, right? S, T, Q, X, and Y. I feel like writing H0 of S here as the name for the operator, but that can be very confusing. Sometimes I call the whole span S, but you might be thinking of just like a groupoid. So I won't name it anything for now. That's Jim's way of solving these problems. Which is good. So I find a lot of mathematicians. Am I in the camera? Am I in the field of view?
I thought you would.
I thought I was. Yeah, now I feel like I'm more in the field of view. I can feel how high the camera right on. So, right, so mathematicians like to write things down to stabilize their concepts. They have like a whole bunch of symbols floating around before their eyes when they're thinking about things. And that may or may not be good, but I'll cater to that. So how does it work? Well, Jim basically sketched how it works. He was giving a big philosophy behind it, which involves the concept of transfer for homology. But let me sort of start out a little less focused on transfer and just draw the picture he drew. So the idea is I've got some groupoid X, and I'm going to draw it askew like this for some reason, which you've probably already seen, paid attention. So it'll have a bunch of objects, and it'll have a bunch of morphisms as well, but I think I'll draw the different components. Maybe I won't bother drawing identity morphisms, okay? So I'll deliberately not draw identity morphisms. Keep things simple. So this is a groupoid here that has three components. I'm just sort of drawing them side by side. And then here Y is some other groupoid at the other foot of our span. And let me just draw one that has, say, two components. So I'm drawing some objects and so on and so forth. So the span will involve another groupoid, S, which is getting mapped down to both X and Y. And that's why we're drawing it in this funny kind of way, because it allows us to draw one of the functors, T, sort of the projection down in that direction, the other functor, Q, as projection down in this direction. And so you see that what we're getting resembles a matrix. It resembles a 3 by 2 matrix in this example here. So you can have all sorts of objects and morphisms in this box, but you could never have a morphism that crosses one of those dotted lines. Why could you never have a morphism crossing one of these dotted lines from here to here?
It would project down to a morphism over here, and we don't have.
Yeah, it would project down to a morphism from one component to another, but we set them up so that they're different components and not no isomorphisms from here to here by definition. So we get something like this. Yeah, I'm sorry, Jim, I just stole this. I didn't from you, but I just felt like I needed to talk about this. Something like that. That's some empty slots. And so we're trying to take that kind of thing and turn it into an operator from the homology of x to the homology of y. In this example, the homology of x is a three-dimensional vector space with a basis being these three components here, and the homology of y is two-dimensional. And there's a sort of obvious way to try to do it, which is just to read off from this S here a matrix, a 3 by 2 matrix, and interpret that as a linear operator. So for each guy in X, you get, and each guy in Y, right, you get a matrix entry, which right now is a groupoid, but we'll figure out how to turn that groupoid into a mere number, and then that will give us a matrix of numbers. So this gives us a matrix of groupoids. What size is it? It's an X bar times Y bar size matrix of groupoids, where X bar is a set of components of X.
What you're saying is S is.
Is it? Well, it almost is it. Yeah. I mean, you could say it is.
I'm
Yeah.
not in the sense of zero, you're using this.
This thing
picture of
gives
gives
a, yeah, right. Yeah, so S gives the span of groupoids. Yeah, sorry, the sentence that starts out with a big complicated picture. See, like draw a picture of the Mona Lisa and say, is the example. So this becomes an X bar by Y bar size matrix of numbers. Well, what are numbers? We're working over an arbitrary field, so we could say in, well, maybe it can't be an arbitrary field now. Now it has to be a field with characteristic 0. Yeah, I forgot. In K, well, you'll see in a second, but sorry, I just need to figure out what kind of numbers I'm allowed.
How many digits?
I didn't tell you how we're going to calculate these cardinalities. So it's going to turn out that these cardinalities of these groupoids can be fractions. And so that's the new twist. If we had a matrix of sets, we got them from a matrix of natural numbers. We've talked about categorifying spans of sets, finite sets, give matrices of natural numbers. But I haven't told you how we're going to calculate the cardinality of a groupoid. And the big surprise is you get more. You get rational numbers. So you can interpret a fraction in any field where you're allowed to divide by everything not zero.
But now there is no G, so I presume you're going to do S over G.
Well, these groupoids, they could be groupoids like S over weakly over G. Is that what you meant? When you said S over G, you mean S weakly over G?
Fraction by doing something like S over G.
Right, that's where you'll get some groupoids that have interesting automorphisms. Yeah. Okay, but anyway, sorry, this is a little technical point. It'll have to be able to divide and realize. So how, but the most interesting thing is how. So what we do,
Why can't you be characteristic 0?
let me tell you what we're going to do.
Okay.
And you'll see that I divide by some number in my formula.
Okay.
You can only divide by non-zero integers with complete abandon if you're in a field of characteristics.
Sure it's not.
Yeah, you're sure it's not zero.
Right.
Yeah. So I should have stuck to the complex numbers, but I'm trying to pretend like I'm an algebraist. So, okay, how? By turning each groupoid in our matrix we have a matrix of groupoids. They're all finite, by the way. That will help certain sums converge. That's what sum into a number, its cardinality. So now I have to tell you about the cardinality of a groupoid. So, of a finite groupoid. So, sounds as if Purva already knows about the cardinality of the finite groupoid and why it can be a fraction. But
Let's solve one fraction, must be the first.
okay, I'll draw you a finite groupoid, and you figure out its cardinality. Well, okay, I'll start out with an easy one. Like I said, I'm not drawing identity morphisms. So this is a groupoid here with only identity morphisms. So how many dots do you see? Good. Okay, just check. So if your groupoid is actually just a finite set, interpreted as a groupoid with only identity morphisms, we want the cardinality to be the usual thing. Okay, so that's 3. So the cardinality of this, if x is this, then its cardinality we want to be the usual set cardinality. But the interesting thing happens when we consider more interesting groupoids. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this set and I'm going to fold it over. In other words, there's a nice action of z mod 2 on this set. And I will just mod out by that and get this groupoid, more interesting groupoid. And so I'm only drawing non-identity morphisms, so the non-identity element of z mod 2 maps this one over to this, but it maps back anyway, and this time. So maybe I should draw the identity morphisms. I think I will, but I will, I think I'm going to do it over here. We want to actually see. So what I did here was form this weak quotient. But you really should think of it very viscerally. You just take this page of a book and you fold it over, mod out by z mod 2. Except it's weak modded out by z. So if you have a 3-element set and you fold it in half, how many elements should it have?
You would hope to, but you want to say
3 divided by 2 is 2?
You want to say 3 divided by 2?
Guys, you're in math grad school? Okay, I think what you were saying was that if I have a 3-element set and I mod out by this action of z mod 2 in the ordinary, stupid way, I get a 2-element set.
Yes.
That's right. That's why it's stupid. Okay? So yeah, it's true that if you take x and you mod out in the usual way, and you compute the cardinality of that set, you get 2. But since when is just 3 divided by 2 equal 2? I mean, that was a dumb idea. So the point of the groupoid cardinality, and also the point of a weak modding out, is to do things more intelligently. So what should the cardinality of this really be? If there's any justice in the world, as Raoul Bott used to say, when he couldn't quite figure out how to prove something. Yeah, 3 halves. 3 divided by 2, right? 3 divided by 2 should be 3 halves, so 1 1/2. So this is better, consists of 1 1/2 things, in some sense. So we just have to figure out how to make that work. And that's the idea of groupoid cardinality. It's a form of cardinality that's compatible with division. Okay, Jim, over here.
You will go show us some advantage of this very soon.
Some advantage of having 3 divided by 2 not equal 2? Okay, I can tell you lots of advantages of that. Yeah, no, it just makes the math work out. So the advantage is that we're trying to categorify normal math. So normal math involves fractions. We're trying to have those fractions be cardinalities of things in a way that's compatible with nice operations on those things.
And what I'm trying to say is this will make perfect sense in the intuitive way if your action was free.
That's right.
And now it's not free, there are some fixed pointers, which is why it's not working out to 3/2 equals 2.
That's right.
And that's the whole problem.
That's right. Yeah, there are lots of advantages.
Your action is not free, but you still want to treat it as if it were free.
That's the way to think about it. So here we have this groupoid. Now, it's equivalent to certain simpler groupoids. And this groupoid cardinality better be invariant under equivalence, because that's the right notion of equivalence of groupoid. So here we have, remember, every groupoid is equivalent to a skeleton, where we pick one representative of each isomorphism class, and then we only look at the automorphisms of that. So skeleton of groupoid will be a disjoint union of groups. So what groups do we get? Well, what group is this? That's Z mod 2, right? That's one object with two automorphisms. So it's a two-element group. There's only one possible, so Z mod 2. So the idea is that that thing, the fold on the page, if you imagine this is modding out as the operation of folding over a page, that element there is kind of folded in half, so it has two symmetries. What about this groupoid here? Or this rest of this stuff, this other component? What group is this groupoid up here equivalent to? You can figure it out by working out the skeleton of it. That's right.
It should be Z mod 3.
Z mod 3. No, so you figure out the skeleton of it.
It's Z mod 1, right? I'm sorry, I mean,
It is.
it is the trivial group. Yeah, Z mod 1. Yeah.
Usually called the trivial group.
Usually called
So what is this thing? This is two isomorphic objects that are isomorphic in a unique way. Like, that's what it is.
Basically, you want to
So it's like saying, I've got two things, and they're, by the way, they're isomorphic in exactly one way. That's a whole lot like having one thing.
Isomorphism is exactly one thing.
So you'd expect it to be like just one thing. But if you think about it, you take the skeleton, so there's two things, but they're both in the same isomorphism class.
So
So
that's what
I'll
I
just take one of them.
So that's what I will manage.
And I only look at its automorphisms,
Okay.
and I get that. And that's the group Z mod 1, that's a trivial group. Yeah, so this is equivalent to this together with this. So the point is having two objects, but by the way, they're isomorphic in a unique way, is conceptually the same as having a single object. This is supposed to be very conceptual stuff. So like if I tell you, like, okay, today we're going to start doing a math problem, and I give you two vector spaces, but oh yeah, they're isomorphic in a specific way. You should, upon hearing that, think, why did he describe it in such a complicated way? He's really talking about one vector space. There's nothing you can do with two vector spaces and a unique isomorphism that you couldn't do with one. And why? Well, it's because those groupoids are equivalent. So the idea of equivalence is that you have lots of things, but by the way, they're all the same thing. Secretly, they're isomorphic. It's not really lots of things. So you can just use a skeleton. Okay. So this groupoid here is equivalent to Z mod 2 disjoint union, the trivial group. And the cardinality of it had better be so what operation should we do to figure out the cardinality of a disjoint union of groupoids? Plus. Otherwise, we're in serious trouble. So let's call it by its name. So, right, one, the terminal groupoid, Z mod 2, that group there.
That's a groupoid.
A group
Z mod 2.
is a groupoid with one object. This is a groupoid with one object, so it's a group, and it's called Z mod 2.
You write cardinality, and then you write what? Because if we saw this one, you would think it's the cardinality of the group.
You'd think it was the cardinality of the set, but I'm thinking of it not as the cardinality of the set, but the cardinality of the groupoid. Okay, that's right. Well, it's interesting, yeah. So you're going to think this is equal to 2, and then you're going to get 3, and then you're going to get this.
Because it's a half.
So it's a half,
Yeah.
it's a half.
Yeah.
So as a groupoid, okay, if you want some extra notation to distinguish between Z1 2 as a set, Z1 2 as a groupoid, then you have to stick in some notation.
Just the cardinality can be given extra notation.
Okay,
Look at the half because it's the folding thing.
right, we need to figure out what the heck we're doing here. I'm doing mathematics the way you really do it, you know, make stuff up and hope it works. So, but now then you have to think about why it's working. So somehow, the fact that this thing here has 2 symmetries should make its cardinality not be 2 or something, but a half. And the idea is, what this thing is, it's like a point that's been folded in half. Now normally you can't fold a point in half. But sometimes that's what happens, right? So like if you have like the Z mod 2 acting on the real line, and you mod out by it, you get this half line. But there's something really different about that point there than any of the other points. And the reason why is because if you had done the weak quotient, you would remember that this thing has a symmetry, a 2-fold symmetry, whereas these other guys only have identity markers. This is like a discrete version of this. And so this kind of thing shows up in the theory of orbifolds, where they take manifolds and they mod out by a group action, and then they say, oh no, we shouldn't have done it the ordinary dumb way, we should have done it this weak way. And then you see that you should really keep track of the symmetries of the points in the weak quotient. And so everywhere else, 2 points are getting mapped to 1, so the number of points is getting halved in some sense. Except here, but really it is getting halved, but it's getting halved in a different way. It's getting halved by getting a symmetry to cardinality 2. So that's the interesting thing that we learned from this muddling around, is that if you have an object that has a lot of symmetries, you should think of it as having a smaller cardinality. And now we can just write down the formula for groupoid cardinality from what we just did.
This is why you need this sort of sum is what you need to convert.
Right. So we're doing, notice in that formula, we did some addition and we did some division. And I just want to make sure.
I think the rational numbers where
Positive 1 over.
there's something like 3 over 2 and 6 over 4 are not the same cardinality. Or are we going to have that?
No, it's only 1
You
over
can have
n.
groupoids that weren't equivalent that have the same cardinality.
Okay.
That's
So
one.
we will reduce cardinality.
No, your cardinalities are always only 1 over n. Because
Pretty-
when you take a skeleton,
I don't think
You
that's
only have-
quite what he was asking.
Oh, no.
How do you get a
For
six
each
over 4?
skeleton, but. Yeah, I don't. You got a 3 over 2, that's not a 1 over n.
You're saying.
The answer is
If you
it should be
do
one over.
six
The answer
over
will be a
nine.
sum of things of that formula. So here's the formula.
How would you get a 6 over 4? You would, in any case, you would get 3 over 2 or 6 over 4 by adding these things up.
I haven't decided why yet, I'm just saying that. What
In this case, you would only get them by just adding 1 over n.
The answer will always be the sum of reciprocals of natural numbers, because your groupoid will be a disjoint union of groups. And those groups come from looking at different components in a groupoid. Pick an object in that component, count its symmetries, and take the reciprocal of that. So that's what this formula says.
Right, the fraction is the sum of 1 over n.
So what I do is
Yeah, but then 3 over 2 is 6 over 4,
yeah,
because you're getting it the same way.
but I think he was talking about something slightly, but never mind. So, not yet. So, the cardinality of the groupoid will be the sum over isomorphism classes of objects, where we take a representative from each isomorphism class, look at its automorphisms, the morphisms for itself, count them, and take the reciprocal. So that's what we did in our example, and that should be the general rule. And so then you should check that you get this nice formula. If I take a finite set and I mod out weakly by a finite group, I get this groupoid, and I can calculate its cardinality, and it will turn out that it's the cardinality of my finite set provided by the cardinality of the group. So that's what's good about this definition. Yeah, just check, you can check that.
So you see what
So
I'm
good,
saying,
it's
like
like
you take
shot.
a, like you take a set, if I have a 6 element set mod D4, that's the same as a
Right,
3
so what
element
he's
set
saying
mod
is you can
D2.
take a 6-element set mod, any action in C mod 4, and its cardinality will be 6 over 4, which is equal to 3 over 2. So you can certainly have equivalent groupoids that have the same cardinality.
The reason why they're the same is the other one.
Well, why, what do you mean by saying?
6 over 4 equals 3 over 2 because of the other formula. Because you can write both of those numbers, 6 over 4, 3 over 2, as a sum of these fractions.
But there'd be different sums of different.
Yeah, there'll be different sums of different fractions, so it's not going to be sort of a miracle that you get the same
Yeah,
answer.
it's not obvious that they're the same that way because they came from different places.
That's right. He's just sort of
But
saying
you're
that
working
this
with-
formula is obvious.
So this formula is not this, but all I'm saying is once you're
Obviously,
calculating
you
it.
think of it.
I think the
but-
formula is equivalent to some famous theorem, though. Isn't there some classic way you can do something? I don't know.
Well, there is one
This is a
theorem called
Exactly, the point is you're calculating
size
the
is
cubes.
from size
Yeah.
counting formula, where
Yeah,
you're going to count the number of elements
I'm
in
just saying that they
Maybe
give
that's
us
not-
Clear that, a priori they didn't come from
they
the.
come from very different looking
Yeah,
groupoids
absolutely.
that
That's
aren't necessarily
quit now. The fastest going to quit for a fist fight.
No, we're just-
Can we ask what the cardinality, can we ask what the cardinality of the groupoid of finite sets is?
We'll leave it as a
Okay.
puzzle for now. What is the cardinality of the groupoid of finite sets?
That's
Homework, that's homework.
And it converges.
It's up to you. Okay, let's quit.